In 2023, Steam saw over 14,000 games released on the platform. In 2024, with more than 3 months to go, the platform has already had over 13,000 releases. Obviously, a large number of these games are shovelware or weird games only Jack Packard has heard of, but there's also a ton of games you probably should have heard of that are just going unnoticed. On the media side of things, we're getting code for interesting looking indie games almost daily at this point. We as part of the media can't even keep up, and no doubt as a consumer you cannot either. The unfortunate thing about this is that so many games are just not finding the audience that they once might have when Steam didn't have 15,000 releases a year. Discoverability is a major issue in the industry right now, and one that no one knows how to solve. Algorithms dictate what you see, content creators can't keep up with releases, social media, well, we don't talk about that much these days, and we have showcases and game sales all year round after E3 collapsed, highlighting so many games so often that it's starting to devalue the act of adding games to even a wish list. This struggle to even be discovered has been a big contributor to the layoffs and studio closures we've seen across the industry this year. Steam Summer Sales used to be a huge event for the indie space, and now in 2024, it's just a blip on the radar in terms of sales. There are so many games released weekly that developers are essentially forced to put them out at a discount just to get those initial sales that will propel them on the new and trending tab on the platform. Mike Rose, the CEO of No More Robots, a smaller games publisher, recently spoke with GamesIndustry.biz about the state of indie games publishing and the industry in general, saying, "The problem with the new situation is that everything I did when No More Robots started, getting cheeky Xbox Game Pass deals and making it onto the Steam front page, isn't available anymore," he says. "When the Steam Summer Sale happens, it's absolutely AAA all the way down that have paid for those slots. It used to be the Summer Sale would make us a year of burn rate, and now it's a nice little spike." This year alone, we've seen the closure of multiple games publishers that focused on smaller, more niche games, including Private Division, Versus Evil, Humble Games, and just last week, Annapurna Interactive's publishing team all suddenly resigned when a deal to go independent fell through recently. Annapurna plans to rehire all those positions, but it won't be the same team that curated their current catalog. And those are just the highly publicized ones. Consolidation has also been quietly happening with small publishers like Merge Games, Just for Games, and Modus Games, all being brought under one umbrella at Maximum Entertainment just 2 weeks ago. Layoffs followed at Merge Games, as reported by Games Industry and various LinkedIn posts I saw. Unfortunately, I think we're going to see more of the smaller and mid-tier game publishers and developers shut their doors before the year is out and into 2025. Both developers and publishers have been warning for the last couple years that funding is extremely hard to secure, Game Pass deals have slowed down, and subscription models in general are completely changing the landscape of how people acquire games in the first place. As we saw ourselves in games media, companies got very excited about people being home and spending more time with their entertainment hobbies during COVID. A bunch of investment happened to capitalize on this as companies overhired and overspent, and as people have returned to normalcy, companies that chased that exponential growth are now downsizing quickly. This ties in with the amount of games that did find funding, as there was a lot of money to go around. What we're seeing right now is many of the projects that started production during COVID all arriving at once, leading to an oversaturated market. So many quality games are just going completely unnoticed because there's just too much competition and not enough people or time to spread the attention around to all these different games. Add in subscription models where players have access to huge libraries of games at any given time, and we're now in an environment where there are so many options that just being a good game with a relatively high review score isn't enough to stand out anymore. As I was writing the script, the developer of Penny's Big Breakaway, Evening Star, a well-regarded 3D platformer published by Private Division, had to make layoffs at their studio, citing volatile market conditions in the games industry. That's a phrase echoed throughout the games industry over and over again as more than 12,000 people have been laid off this year alone. And that's only the ones we know from public announcements. The real number is likely much higher than that, with lots of smaller, less public studios closing and not catching the news cycle. One of the positive side effects of all this change, however, is that new indie game publishers and developers are unshackling themselves from the demands of major corporations like 2K, Ziff Davis, or Annapurna, and are not focused on unsustainable exponential growth. They're also finding new creative ways to fund their projects. If you ask them, most developers just want to make enough money to sustain themselves, their studio, and allow them to make their next game. Nigel Laurie, co-founder and chief marketing officer of Devolver Digital, shared their thoughts on the state of the industry with GamesIndustry.biz, indicating that there is a light at the end of this dark tunnel right now. You can see that the unfortunate culling down of studios and publishers will continue for a bit longer, Laurie says, but from those ashes, I'd expect to see new small studios full of talented developers from all areas of the industries, learning from the mistakes of their former executives and taking measured, creative risks to continue to push the medium forward into unexpected directions. This new wave of publishers are often formed by the people that actually make the games themselves, and know the expectations of players better than the moneymen and the shareholders that only care about profit and quick unsustainable growth. We've already been seeing this in action throughout the industry with the rise of new publishers like Big Mode, Animal Wealth doc soon by the way, Outer Sloth from Among Us developer Inner Sloth, and Kepler Interactive, which is a collective of developers that formed a publisher together. Kepler Interactive is the publisher of games like Sifu, Scorn, Flintlock the Siege of Dawn, Pacific Drive, and the highly anticipated Clear Obscure Expedition 33. Kepler is co-owned by the developers that publish projects through it, and any studio that decides to release through them also gets the option to join the group. Once they join, they get an equal say on decision making and equal share of the benefits that Kepler provides. Outer Sloth is taking the funds they make from Among Us and other projects to fund new games. They state plainly that they're not a publisher and are literally just handing out funds to developers of games they want to see made. No strings attached. These new types of funding models are adapting to the changing landscape of the industry. The churn and burn of live service games, games that take way too long to make, overinflated budgets, and unsustainable sales expectations from the major publishers are pushing developers to find better ways to make the projects they're passionate about. With the lack of funding options available right now, I believe we're also seeing a second golden age of Kickstarter funded titles as well. Some of the really neat looking ones I'm keeping an eye on personally are Outbound, Alzera Radiant Echoes, Altered Alma, and the next game in the popular My Time At series, My Time at Evershine, just to name a few. We've also seen the return of game demos as a way to promote games, giving potential buyers a way to test the game themselves before deciding to make a purchase. In my opinion, demos are a necessity these days for people trying to wade through the flood of new releases and decide which game to buy. The industry is undoubtedly going to continue to see a high number of layoffs, studio closures, and game cancellations over the next few years, but we are already starting to see people within the industry take risks and make the changes necessary to build a more sustainable future for themselves. Before I wrap up this episode of Unpacked, I did want to take a moment to highlight a bunch of cool games that have come out recently that feel like they've struggled to get the attention they deserve. One in particular I'd like to point out, as a noted fan of Viva Pinata, is Horticular, which is essentially top-down pixel art Viva Pinata. It also runs great on Steam Deck with controller support. That's all that needs to be said about that one, really. Go play it. There's a lot of cool games out there waiting to be discovered, so maybe this will help you find your next adventure. I better not see anyone in the comments saying they don't have any new games to play after watching this episode.
This video is brought to you by Worlds of Aria. Want to experience the choice-driven thrills, betrayals, and hilarity of tabletop RPGs without all the setup? Then jump into Worlds of Aria, the cooperative RPG adventure full of twists, turns, and undoubtedly some natural ones to get your blood flowing. Choose from one of 12 characters and party with up to 3 of your friends via local or online multiplayer, complete with a friend pass that only requires one person to own the game. Will you act together to try to solve the various fantasy scenarios, or embrace your inner wild card, betray them all at the last second, and possibly get uninvited to several upcoming weddings, birthday parties, and Arbor Day celebrations? Oh no. The choice is yours, but don't worry. You can replay scenes to discover their multiple endings and various secrets, so maybe Arbor Day is back on the table. Worlds of Aria launches on September 24th on PC, so head on over to the Steam page to learn more today.